Okay, so we'll create a new project for this, and I want a 1080p canvas. So if you click on the FB event image option there, it's set to 1080p automatically, so just click create, and that's a quick way to do it. And now I'm going to drag in a background image, which there is a link in the description box below to download this for free, so you can follow along exactly. And I'm just actually going to drag this to fill the screen. It's a nice textured background, but I think it needs to be darker, so I'm just going to add a brightness and contrast adjustment layer, keep it simple, and brightness I'm going to do is -60, but as usual it's to taste. And now to keep things nice and organised, I'm going to click on the icon for the brightness and contrast adjustment layer, hold the shift key down and click on the actual background itself. And now I'm going to press Command or Control G to put those both into a group. And I'm just going to rename that BG for background. It just really helps to keep organised. So now we want to type. So I'm going to press T for the type tool, or you can click on the T in the toolbar down there. I'm just going to click down once on the canvas and you see it's added a new type layer. And I'm going to type gold here. I'll move that in, but that's not in the correct font that I used in the preview anyway. So I want to replicate what I've done before. So I'm going to change the font. So click on the T icon here to bring up the character dialog menu. And if you don't have this, by the way, go to the window menu at the top, go down and you'll see character. If you click on that, it will make it appear in this bar next to the layer stack. So I'm going to change the font to Lobster, which is quite a nice scripted font. I'm going to change the size to 800. But of course you can do whatever you like, but I'm just doing this to replicate what I've worked up previously. Okay, so it doesn't matter what colour the font is because that's going to get overridden in a minute anyway. So double click next to the text layer name. So it says gold, double click in the space next to it and you'll bring up the layer style dialog. So for this, there's only a couple of steps really, but we revisit it later. Bevel and emboss is the first thing you want to click on. Now we hardly change anything here, leave all the settings as default apart from the size, which I'm putting to 20 just because I've experimented with this before. And the depth I'm going to put 400. Now all the depth is going to do, it's going to sharpen up that beveled effect. As you can see, it makes it a bit more pronounced. You don't want something too thick or too thin, otherwise the effect might look a bit strange. But of course, play around and see what works for you. Now I'm going to change the angle of the bevel, again, to something that I've experimented with previously that I like for this particular image. But again, your mileage may vary. These are good things to experiment and have a play around with. So that's it for bevel emboss. Now the only other thing in this screen at the moment is gradient overlay. And we don't even have to go into it. We can just click it on. And as you can see, it's put it on there. I will go in to show you what it's doing. All it's doing is applying a generic gradient to the text from black to white from the bottom to the top. And that's just with the generic default settings, which is what we want. And I'll show you why in a second. So we'll click OK for the moment. And now I'm going to put this gold text into a group. So Command or Control G on it. And we'll just name that text. Now this is for a reason. And the reason is some of the adjustments we'll be doing shortly, it will only work correctly if the text font itself is in a group, in a folder. So on that folder itself, I'm going to double click again next to the word text to bring up the layer styles for the folder. I'm just going to add a bit of drop shadow to this. Again, this is to taste. It's just to give it a little standoff from the background. You can come back and change this to whatever you like, whenever you like. But let's just give it a starting point. Something like that's fine. So we've got that. So anything we put in that folder now is going to get that same little drop shadow. Right, so the next step is an adjustment layer. The first adjustment layer is going to be curves. So we're going to go and create a curves adjustment layer. And we're going to drag it above the text folder. We have to create a clipping mask. We have to clip this to the text folder for it to apply the effects correctly. So how to do this is make sure it's above the text folder on the layer stack and hold the Alt key and click on the curves icon. and you'll see this little downwards arrow appears, and that just means that that is now clipped to the text folder, which will affect anything within the folder itself. So in this case, the gold text, or the text that says gold. Now, here's where the fun happens. Here's where the metallic effect is created. Because we've got this gradient, we've got some information to abuse with curves. So I'm just going to click 4 points on this curve, and I'm going to just start dragging them up and down, making a really weird curve here. And if you watch the text, you can see straight away what's happening. The strange and extreme curves that we're playing around with here are grabbing onto that boring generic gradient that we applied earlier, and they're pushing and pulling it in so many directions and compressing the highlights and the shadows. You get a natural metallic effect from it, and you can play around with this for ages, and you can add more points and you can experiment until you get an effect, a metallic effect that you like. I think that's good for the moment. You can play around this for hours, but that's fine. And so at the moment, we've in effect got a silver or a chrome kind of look, which is cool as it is. So the next step is to add a bit of color to this. So I'm going to create a new adjustment layer. I'm going to do color fill. There's obviously lots of ways you can do this, but this is a good solution for this particular job. So I'm going to change it to green 195. And blue, I'm going to change to 35. Now, this is just something that I came up with when I was experimenting, but of course, as usual, whatever works for you. And now I'm going to hold Alt and click on the icon to clip it again, clip it down to the text. So we're following that trend of everything affecting the text folder. And I'm going to change the blending mode of that to soft light. And this would just apply that color in a more realistic way than if we changed it to color blending mode or something along those lines. Now I'm going to go back into the curves very quickly because I want a bit more darkness in some of the reflections, and you can go back and tweak. And the beauty about this whole technique is that this remains live type until the very end, so you can go in and change the type and the font at any point. Okay, so that's looking good to me. Now we're going to go back into the layer style of the original gold text. So if you come back down to the actual text layer where it says gold, double click again in the empty space to bring up the layer style. And now we're going to do a little adjustment. We're going to go to inner glow. Right, and the reason why we're doing this is not an essential step, but it can just add a bit more variance to the and a bit more interest to the gold effect that you've already got so far. So change this luminosity, and that's quite important because it makes sure there's no strange color shifts when you adjust these settings. Otherwise it can introduce some weird colors. So blend mode is luminosity. For this, I'm going to drop the opacity down to 30 because that's what I've tried before and I like the look of it. Size, I'm going to change to 45. And if you look at the screen, look at the main gold logo now, you can see what just happened. Let me turn that on and off. You can see how with that inner glow applied, now how the curves adjustment layer is interacting with this below it. It's bending the reflections and just adding nice, sharper sort of gold edges to it. It just looks a lot more convincing, I think. But again, it's personal taste, as almost everything we do is. And the range, I'm going to put that to 100 because I quite like that. Yeah, I like that. So that's made a difference, but you can only really do that inner glow stage after you've done the curves, because otherwise you won't be able to see what effect it's having. So click OK. So now we've got a really nice gold effect, but that's not quite finished yet because it looks nice, but it looks a bit too illustrative, a little bit sort of, yeah, created. I want to make it look a little bit more realistic, and how we're going to do that is with some fingerprints. So again, this file is included in the description box for the download link. I'm going to drag it in. It looks strange at the moment. I'm going to put it right at the top of the layer stack and hold Alt to clip it again to everything below. And all this is, it's a black and white image of a lot of fingerprint smudges, as you can see. I'm just going to enlarge it so it covers all the text. Now this is a trick that's used a lot in 3D graphics and CGI to make things look less fake and a bit more realistic. So when we put it over the top, I found that overlay works well for this, and before I change the opacity to knock it back, this isn't how it's supposed to look, but already it's giving it like this really dirty antique gold effect, which in its own right could be really nice and useful. But I'm going to drop the opacity back to about 30% for my tastes. So it's quite subtle, and you can make it as subtle or not as you want, but if I turn that layer on and off, you can see now that it's just adding a little bit more contrast, but it's just adding these little fingerprint and little dirty marks just here and there. Not very obvious because you don't want it to look dirty. So the only thing left to do now is add a light bloom effect to the highlight areas. Now this is the only part of the process that's not live, meaning once you do this, if you type or change the font, you'll have to redo this step, but it's so quick that it's definitely worth doing. So we'll go up to the select menu and go to color range. And I'm just going to click on part of the image that's got the strongest highlight, and then play with this fuzziness slider until you see it appear in the screen below. What we're looking for is just to make a rough selection of the main highlight areas of the gold. You don't want to bring it up so much that it includes lots of information. You really just want the more obvious highlight areas, something like that. Click OK, and then straight away go down to the adjustment layers button and create a color fill. And in this color fill, we don't want to use pure white, we want to use something close to white. So if we just pick a color from the existing image in a highlight area, maybe just make it a little bit brighter, and click OK. So now what we've created there is, you can barely see it there, a color adjustment layer that just has the highlight areas from the main image on. Now this is the only layer that we don't clip. We don't want it to be clipped because we want the effect to go outside of the text. So all we do now is just a case of double clicking on the layer mask here, go to the mask options, go to the feather, and we're just going to increase the feather. And if you watch what happens, we'll start to get a glow, like a light bloom glow effect, but only around the areas of highlights. So it's way more realistic than just adding a generic outer glow to the actual product, because it wouldn't work like that in real life. You'd only get the light bloom and the light glow where light was reflecting and hitting off it. So you can obviously make it as big or as small as you like. You can adjust the opacity. So we'll maybe change that down a little bit, make it a little bit more subtle. And again, turn it on and off, and it is quite subtle. I mean, you can make it as obvious as you like, but it really just adds an extra little touch of realism to that shot.